I'm great, grounded on my great grandfather, God roll high. Once it was called the island, but the Milford is what they call it today. And underground mine to see on the Cuyuna range where iron is found. In the year of 1920, a disaster took place like never before. Holy Lake came into Milford mine with water and mud, quicksand and slime. All the sirens and bells and the steam whistles blew. The sirens and bells and the whistles they knew. All the preaching and screaming and tears that were shed. 41 miners at Milford were dead. Off the ladder rode 7 and scrambled so fast. They climbed for their lives to the top of the shaft. In just 15 minutes, it filled up that hole, leaving 41 miners with no place to go. They were sons and husbands and fathers for sure, just making a living for their families they were. Men and miners, oh, what should they do? Some work underground to buy bread and shoes. All the sirens and bells and the steam whistles blew. The sirens and bells and the whistles they knew. All the screeching and screaming to that shed. Morning was light at the lighted our dead. Mine were pretty, proud in a line. My great grandfather, God for all. This song is dedicated to my great grandfather, All miners lost their lives. The Milford Miners Act of 1924.
That was a sound late one afternoon 100 years ago at the Milford Mine, located about 5 miles north of Crosby. 41 miners died February 5th, 1924, when Foley Lake broke through into the underground mine. It was, and still is today, the worst mining disaster in Minnesota history, and one of the worst in our nation's history. Before we go any further, if I could just get everybody to please silence their phones if you have them with you. Tonight we remember that tragedy, and more importantly, we want to share the stories of some of the miners who drowned that day. More than 2/3 of them were immigrants from other countries, mostly Austria and Finland. Mining was hard and dangerous work for those who came to this area to make a living, to provide for their families, and to live the American dream. Over the history of the Cuyuna Range, more than 200 miners lost their lives in accidents, seldom more than ever 1 or 2 at a time, and never on the scope of the 41 that were killed at the Milford. February 5th, 1924, began just like any other day for the 48 miners that were working in that underground mine. The tired miners were looking forward to the end of their shift at about 4 o'clock that day. But at 3:45, the unthinkable happened. Nearby Foley Lake, under which the Milford Drift, or the tunnel, was being mined, suddenly broke into the mine. The drift, where the mining took place, was 175 feet below ground and then ran horizontally for 2,000 feet, almost half a mile. It ran from the shaft that took the miners down and was also used to bring up the ore. The first indication of the disaster was a sudden, terrific wind that blew out the miners' carbide lamps. They relit them, and again they blew out, but not before they realized that there was a torrent of water and mud rushing toward them. "Run for your lives," several men shouted as they tried to stay ahead of the impending doom. Of the 48 miners working that day, only 7 made it to safety. Those who were working closest to the shaft area and were able to scramble to the shaft and then to climb the ladders. They climbed the ladders as fast as they could. When they got to the surface, their legs gave out due to fatigue and they collapsed. It only took about 15 minutes for the mine to completely fill up with mud and water.
The Milford steam whistle, which we would call today a whistle, they called it what we would call a siren, began to sound, alerting those on the ground and those above that there's a problem in the mine. Soon, whistles from the other mines and locomotive whistles joined in. All of them blew over an hour, calling anxious family members and fellow miners to the Milford site. They knew something was wrong because of the alarms, but as it was, there was nothing they could have done. The Milford whistle continued to blow for 4 hours. Clinton Harris was the skip tender, a miner post at the mine. His post was near the shaft, and he would control the skip and carry the miners up and down, as well as the ore that was being removed. He normally worked the night shift, but on that fateful day, he offered to cover for the skip that was sick. When Harris felt the second blast of air and electrical lights around him went out, he knew something was wrong. It was seriously wrong, and in the mine. So he pulled the rope and sounded the warning of the whistle twice to alert the miners both above and below the ground that there was danger. 7 miners passed Harris as they raced to climb up the series of ladders and in the shaft, up the shaft. The cage that would normally carry them was at the surface and was powerless because the electricity had gone out. They encouraged Harris to follow them, but he was concerned that the men that were in the far reaches of the mine would not hear the whistle. So he tied the siren rope around his waist and kept sounding the alarm as the water, mud, and muck entombed him and the other 41 miners. The whistle continued to wail until finally, 4 hours later, someone cut the rope from above the ground. Months later, when the body of Harris was recovered, the rope was still tied around his waist. 37 women became widows that day, and 88 children became fatherless. George H. Crosby, who was the founder of the town Crosby and the president of the mining company, which owned Milford, pledged to the families that the bodies of all the men would be returned to them. 4 pumps were brought in from other mines to drain both the Milford mine and Foley Lake for over 4 million cubic feet of water. Then the mud and the muck had to be brought up bucket by bucket. The first bodies weren't located until 6 weeks after the accident. The last body recovered was that of Arvin Leahy, a 31-year-old immigrant from Finland. His body was found on November 6th, 9 months after the disaster. Okay.
41 miners, 37 wives, and 88 children, all directly affected by the tragic events of that day. Like Clinton Harris, each of them with their own story, how they came to this area, and the devastated families that were left behind. The youngest child orphaned that day belonged to Frederick Hart Sr., a 33-year-old German immigrant. His first and only child, Fred Jr., was born just 5 days earlier. The last thing Fred Sr. said to his 25-year-old wife, Emily, as he left for work on the morning of the 5th, was, "Now you take care of our boy." Fred Hart's body wasn't recovered until more than 4 months later. They found him at the 165-foot level with his partner, Frank Hamilton Sr., both with their arms wrapped around each other, partners in death as well as in life. Frank Hamilton was 43 years old, an immigrant from Austria, and left behind a 39-year-old wife, Frances, and 8 children, 7 girls and 1 son, ages 19 years to 6 months. His only son, 14-year-old Frank Jr., was a hero that day. By state requirements, a man had to be 18 years old to work in the underground mines, although nobody checked him and physical exams weren't required. Frank Jr. was a 6-foot husky boy, and nobody questioned his age when he began working in the mine with his father to help make ends meet for the family. Frank Jr. and several other miners were working at the 175-foot level when they felt the gust of air and men began to yell, "Run for your lives." Frank Jr. would save himself and 2 other miners that day, but he was unable to save his father. As they took off running, he heard his dad holler, "Goodbye." In the damp dark, with water rushing in, Matt Kangas ran ahead of the young Haverton with Harry Hosford close behind. In an interview later with the Duluth News Tribune, Kangas said, "I ran like hell. We can't save our lives no more if we don't run. I know, so I run. No time for the gates, no time for the cage, no time for anything. I just run and fall and run some more. I get to the ladder, I reach for it, I miss it. I grab it and start up. I'm all in, but I'm damned if I stop." At this point, the young Haverton, who was climbing behind Kangas, jumped in between Kangas's legs and boosted him up the ladder while reaching back for his partner, Hosford, and pulling him up. They were 3 of the 7 miners who made it out alive. 52 years later, in 1976, now at age 66, Frank Jr. nearly broke down crying in an interview as he remembered. "I took my partner out of the mud. He was in mud up to his hips. That's how fast the water was coming and the mud, but we made it. And when we got to the top, we just laid down on the surface. Everybody came rushing to see what was the matter. Well, that took about 15 minutes, and the whole thing was over. I knew then I would never see my dad no more. They were all dead."
"41 dead and only 7 survivors. There were a few other miners that might have drowned that day, but as fate would have it, didn't enter the mine that day. Harry Rice was normally the day skip tender, but covered the night shift the evening before because the other skip tender had been sick. As a result, he stayed home all day Tuesday, and Clinton Harris took his place and became one of the victims. Frank Rory wasn't feeling well on Tuesday morning and decided to take the day off, thus escaping the fate of his fellow miners. Another miner who would easily have met his fate drowning that day was Pete Stefano.
One of our presenters, Joan Stefano, was unable to be here tonight, but Pete Stefano was her dad. And when we first presented this program last February, she shared how a few weeks before the disaster, Peter just went to his foreman and said, "I can't work there no more. The fumes, the dampness, it's making me sick. I need to transfer to another mine." And so just a few weeks before the disaster happened, he transferred to another mine. Otherwise, he would have probably perished. And Joan Stefano would not have been here either. Now to tell a little bit of the story of one of her ancestors, we're going to bring Jane back up.
Could this tragedy have been avoided? I believe it could, if they would have listened to, if the miners would have listened and the officials would have listened to my grandfather, Vincenzo Roca. I'm Jane Drink, and I'm a 1981 graduate of Crosby-Ironton High School. My grandfather, Vincenzo Roca, immigrated to the U.S. from Italy in 1910. He was drawn to Minnesota because he had an older brother that was working in the iron mines, and he wanted that economic opportunity that he wouldn't have been able to find in Italy. He was known for his quick wit, his huge gardens, his intelligence, and his really good wine. I guess I didn't get to have any. His job during the time at the Milford mine was that of timberman. After the initial blast of the ore or the vein, the timberman would get the area, later go into the area of the mine and get the ore out. The timberman had to be smart, almost like an engineer, to get that job done. 2 weeks or so before the fateful February day, my grandfather noticed that there was seepage in the shaft. He went up to the surface immediately and informed one of the foremen what he saw. The foreman just ignored him and told him to get back to work. My grandpa told us that he believed that they didn't listen to him because he was a young Italian immigrant who didn't really know anything. My grandfather quit that day. At that time, he had a wife, 6 kids to support, but he knew he wouldn't be able to support them if he wasn't alive. I wish that someone would have listened to him and not let greed motivate the owners who only wanted to get the manganese concentration of ore that was under the Milford mine. After he heard about the tragedy, he felt really bad, but he did continue to work in the mining industry until 1950s. I'm grateful because my mother was born in 1932, and if Grandpa would not have quit and listened to his gut to say this isn't safe, lots of us on this earth wouldn't be here. And it saddens me that he did notice it and could have possibly avoided that tragedy.
A miner who almost made it out of the Milford mine but perished was Miner Graves, who was 51 years old and left behind a wife and 6 children. Graves was climbing behind 41-year-old Emo Cuyuna, the last survivor, but got caught up in the rising mud and water and was so exhausted that he was unable to extricate himself. Abby Cafus, who will be a 7th grade student at Crosby-Ironton this year, is the great-great-great-granddaughter of Miner Graves. 2 years ago, she put together a presentation on the Milford disaster that was shown to all the classes at Cuyuna, at Crest, the elementary school. She's also the great-granddaughter of Virgil Ollie, who taught English at CI for 31 years, was a member of the Historical Society, and authored a book on the Milford mine disaster. Included in her presentation is a video clip of a public television interview that aired in 2005 about the disaster with Ollie and Elsie Lauder, whose brother perished in the mine. Here's Andy.
The Milford mine disaster was caused when a mine in between Milford Pond and Foley Lake in Minnesota flooded. This event happened in 1924. Before being named the Milford Mine, it was called Ida Mine after George Crosby's wife. My great-great-great-grandpa was involved in this disaster and passed away at the age of 51. This was the biggest disaster in the area as 41 men lost their lives and only 7 survived. That means there's only 7 survivors out of 48 men. In about 12 minutes, half of the mine filled. In about 15 minutes, the whole mine had flooded. Here's the clip on.
My dad was a miner, underground mining, and every morning at 5 o'clock he'd get up and put his mining clothes on and take off. My dad was a typical Croatian man. His hands were big and big mustache. He was a hard-working man. He used to have to bring in his lunch at noon because he wasn't feeling well a lot of the time, and my mother would cook soup for him. And then he would have hot soup at noon. We brought his dinner to him every single day. One of us, at home there were 6 of us. So my dad worked in Eminent Steel in the #1 and #2 mine, and the Milford. Those are the 3 mines my dad worked in.
The Milford mine, located about 4 miles north of Crosby, and it was situated between 2 lakes. What is now called Milford Lake, at that time it was called Island Lake, and Foley Pond. From the property line to Foley Pond is about the length of a football field, about 300 feet.
My dad never talked about the Milford, but my brother-in-law did. That was a bad mine.
In 1924, they were just getting to the point where they could really get at the high-grade ore. Probably one of the richest as far as manganese was concerned. And so there was almost a frenzy to get that manganese out of the mine. And it seemed that the closer they got to the property line, the richer they got.
A lot of the younger fellows that worked the mine went other places. But you see, my dad had a family, so he had to stay put. He had no learnings, he had no education, so he had to take what was for him.
But most of the miners who went to work, through the years we found out, went to work afraid. And the Milford was really no better, probably no worse than any other mine. February 5th, there was snow on the ground. It was a very cold day.
I was 17 years old. The day was heavy. Like afterwards, you just knew there was something brewing in the air. The whistles were blowing.
Almost like a pack of coyotes or a pack of banshees wailing off in the distance. It was almost as if they thought hanging on a whistle would stop the disaster.
And I tried to get the telephone operator, because in the days when you had to ring for the operator. And I asked Mabel what was going on, why were the whistles blowing? And she said, well, there's something real bad that happened at the Milford mine, but we don't know what.
I was working not near anybody. Then the wind hit me. I fell down on my lap and out again. I knew what it was. I was in a time like that before I went down to Michigan. So I knew if we lost the minute, it was too late. I yelled and I ran like hell. We can't save our lives no more. We don't run like nose. I run. No time for the gates. No time for the cage. No time for anything. I was just running, fall down and running some more. I get to the ladder, I reach for it, I miss it. I grab it, I start up. I am all in, but I'm damned if I stop. Matt Canis, Pump Man.
Nobody ever dreamed that a lake would come, or that a mine 200 feet deep would fill in 7 minutes. You know, it filled so fast that 41 men out of 48 could not get to the ladders to come up.
We were hoping that if there would be another bunch of fellas that would come up, but they never came up.
But first they wondered if they should entomb the mine, just seal the shaft and put a mine in the duct and so forth. And most of the widows said no, they wanted the bodies back. And besides, there was real high-grade manganese under there, which was really the fundamental reason, I think, but that's personal opinion. But anyhow, they found out that what they had to do was to drain Foley Pond first, before the mine went there. As the body was discovered, generally, you had to remove the mud and the mire and all of that by hand, shovel, pick and shovel.
My father was one of the first ones to go to work. It was hard because he knew everybody, but they needed to work. My brother-in-law was 28 when this happened. They had 4 children. They didn't find him until the following July in the mine.
Did your father find your brother?
Yeah, he was the one that found him. He recognized him by the scar on the back of his neck because it was all decomposed by then. It was hard on my dad because they got along real good, they were real good buddies. But then that's it. It went.
Meeting called to order 2 p.m. at Armory in Crosby, May 9th, 1924. I want to assure all present that the members of this commission are going into this matter with an open mind. We want you to tell your story here and not make your statements out on the street, where they gather wings and give people wrong impressions of the situation. We want every person to be respectful, to be tolerant, and give us the facts, and nothing but the facts.
And the job of the commission was to determine the cause of the accident, if there was any fault, part of the management, who was liable. The newspaper said it was an act of God. Shame on God if you let that happen.
Did you ever talk with any of the men about the mine?
Yes.
Did you think the Milford mine was a safe place in which to work?
Oh, I worked there about 9 months.
Were you afraid of that mine?
No.
Did you think the water might come in sometime from that lake nearby?
No.
In this area, mining companies were very, very powerful. In many cases, the company owned the house you lived in.
Did you ever think about the lake coming in?
Why? We depend on engineers. We didn't think they would put us on the water to work.
That morning when he left, my sister was standing at the head of the stairs because he was going to work, and when he got to the bottom, he looked back at her, that's the first time that he ever did that, he looked back at her and he said that he was gonna work only until the first of the month because he knew that the mine was getting dangerous.
Now, in your years of experience working in iron ore mines, did you see any difference between the Milford mine and other mines you worked in Michigan?
About the same.
Just the same to you?
What I know, yes.
It's quite a coincidence that so many people could tell the same story, could answer the same questions the same way.
You didn't hear any men complain about the mine?
Never told me anything.
Did you ever consider the body of water over there?
Never gave it the slightest thought.
Did they answer the way they answered truthfully, or did they answer out of fear? Some of them, we found out afterwards, that really were afraid that if they told what they felt, they couldn't substantiate it because it would be opinion, that they would be blacklisted. They came to the conclusion it was as safe as any mine. Well, that's a good way of answering the question politically. Was it a safe mine? Was it safe as any?
Everybody in town knows somebody. My sister got $7,500. She got $80 a month for her 3 children and her.
After all the bodies were recovered from the Milford mine, which took about 9 months, almost 9 months to the day, when it was opened sometime in 1925. From 1925 then until 1932, the mine shipped its high-grade ore out and then was closed because it was no longer profitable to operate. It was not closed for safety reasons. It closed in 1932, and today it would be difficult to even find it less.
All of these stories and many more, including the subsequent recovery efforts, the investigation and the compensation fees of the families of the drum miners, can be found in the book written by Ollie. The families of those killed were paid an average benefit of about $20 a week for 8 years, or a total average of about $2,000. In the clip there, he mentions that you could barely find the Milford, the site of the Milford. That was what it was like in 2005. But in 2007, the Crow Wing County Board of Commissioners dedicated funds to create a park on the Milford mine site that would serve as a memorial to the 41 miners who lost their lives in that disaster. Historic markers and photographs along a series of trails identify the excavated building foundations, including the shaft, A floating memorial boardwalk across the wetland area is inscribed with the names of the 41 miners who died. A secondary goal of the site of the park was to provide a place for visitors to experience the natural beauty of the site while engaging in quiet recreational activities such as hiking, biking, picnicking, wildlife viewing, cross-country skiing, canoeing, and snowshoeing. The park is located 4 miles north of Crosby on Highway 6 and then about 3/10 of a mile left on County Road 30. There is no admission fee, picnic shelters and restrooms are available, and the park is open year-round. The county commissioners dedicated additional funding this year to establish more trails, including another floating bridge that will take visitors out over Foley Lake, now known as Milford Lake, to the spot where the cave-in occurred. Earlier today, the county had held a grand reopening of the park to highlight the additional improvements that are already done. And we would encourage you to visit the Memorial Park if you have not already done so. 48 miners went down February 4th, 1924. Only 7 came up. The survivors were Carl Frawls, Emo Canoe, Matt Cantus, Frank Hamilton Jr., Harry Hosford, Jacob Ravnick, and Mike Sakonik. Undoubtedly, they were plagued with nightmares and guilt about why they survived while so many of their friends and co-workers perished. Before we conclude, we'd like to thank the Cuyuna Country Historical Preservation Society, now known as the Cuyuna Iron Range Historical Network, or Heritage Network, for all their work in preserving the history of the Cuyuna Lakes area, and especially the founding members of the society who interviewed and recorded so many of the stories of the development of our area. We would also like to thank the Hallett Foundation, Charitable Trust Foundation, which helped provide funding for much of their early work, and the Crow Wing County Board of Commissioners for their commitment to the Milford Mine Park. Thanks also to the school's Community Ed Director, Abby Guest, for helping make tonight's program happen. At this point, would anybody here who is a descendant of anyone who worked in or perished in the Milford Mine, please stand for a moment. If you had a relative that worked in the Milford or perished there. Thank you. When we first presented this program in February on the actual anniversary date, the auditorium was packed and we had a lot of descendants here at that presentation. After the conclusion of our program, we would invite you to visit with volunteers from the Heritage Network out in the hallway and have a chance to purchase Berger Ollie's book, The Milford Mine Disaster, which is on sale for $10. The song you heard at the beginning of the program was Minor Graves, a song written and recorded by Clayton Lessard, who is a great-grandson of Minor Graves. At this time, we'll have a reading of the names of the 41 miners who drowned that wintry day. That will be followed by the playing of the Milford Mine Disaster of 1924, a song written and recorded by Dave Peterson, a former teacher and coach at Crosby-Ironton High School. He is also a descendant of Peter Magditch, one of the miners who drowned. Thank you for coming. Those who died. Earl Bernard, age 23, from Michigan.
Mike Bazell, 58.
Oliver Emo Burns, 39, from Staples.
George Vukovic, 29, from Austria.
Emo Arvid Carlson, 29, from Finland.
Valentine Cole, 24, Motley, Minnesota.
Evan Quillen, 39, from the Isle of Man in Ireland in the Irish Sea.
Roy J. Cunningham, 33, Illinois.
Minor graves, 51 from Michigan.
Clinton Harris, 32, St. Matthias.
Frederick Walter Hart, 33 from Germany.
Elmer Haig, 27, Ada, Minnesota.
John Halper Slacker, age 46, from Austria.
George Hokevar, 36, Austria.
John Herman Holm, 40, from Sweden.
Frank Hardivan, 43, Austria.
William Johnson, 35, Finland.
Alex Gillaha, 49, Finland.
Victor Gustav Catola, 39, Finland.
Leo Jefferson Labrache, 33, Spiritwood Lake, North Dakota.
John Edward Hendrickson, 46, Finland.
Arvid Leahy, 31, Finland.
Peter Magditch, 40, Austria.
Simon H. Polominski, also known as Harry Mackey, 39, from Finland.
John Marish, about 40, from Austria.
Ronald McDonald, 32, from Scotland.
Arthur Bernard McHires, 27, from Montreal, Wisconsin.
John Meinerich, 27, from Austria.
Mike Thomas, also known as Tomek, 43, from Austria.
Nick Radich, 38, Austria.
Clyde Brevard, 43, from Canada.
Gasper H. Revord, 38, Michigan.
Nels Ritari, 37, from Finland.
Jerome Ryan, 23, Ironwood, Michigan.
Tony Slack, 33, Austria.
Joseph Snyder, 40, Austria.
Marco Toljan, 39, Austria. Martin
Valancic, 26, Yugoslavia.
Arthur Wolford, 33, from Minnesota.
John Ikalich, 33, Australia.
And Frank Zeitz, 47, from Austria.
Minor, he had a wife. Our children were on the way. He kissed her goodbye and went out the door. Left for the job that day. A cold wind blew on that way. With lunch pail clutched in his hand. He walked to the gate of the Milford. Mine was a hard man. He came from far and forth and light across the wide open sea. Left his mommy and daddy and family here for the land of the brave and free. Little did he know his journey that day to the line of the lake between two lakes. He had 40 other gold rubbing so far, that's right, they ever take. 48 souls stood right down the gate in the winter of 1924. And lay down in the Milford underground, or a whole kind of high. 41 men on the winter afternoon went to a cold water rain. When the mine and the slime had filled up the mine, only 7 lucky souls escaped. Down in the mine with his pick in his hand, 165 feet below. The wind rushed in and the lamps went out. Oh, Peter had nowhere to go. Trapped in the dark, his water rushed in, sinking and going nowhere. There wasn't enough time to call for the cage. 41 men were buried there. Was a fate on that fortune, as some might say, so late in the new tragic days. Only 15 minutes for quitting time. Every bird came looking their way. Each say these men put their lives on the line, wear down their backs and their hands. Well, every day just a company slave, helping to build our land. 48 souls took a ride down the gauge in the winter of 1924. They way down in the liquid underground, from old kind without her own. 41 men on the winter afternoon went to a cold water rain. When the mud and the slime had filled up the mine, only 7 lucky souls escaped. In the blink of an eye, the mud and the slime that rushed in from nearby Foley Lake left 41 women and daughters and children their fathers did. But their last words on the cold winter morning that Peter heard his love to say. Peter, oh Peter, I had a dream last night. Oh Peter, sleep today. Souls took right down the gauge in the winter of 1924. And way down in the Milford underground, from old Cuyuna. 41 men on the winter afternoon went to a cold water rain. When the line slide filled up the mine, 7 lucky souls escaped. 7 lucky souls escaped. 7 lucky souls escaped.
Again, thank you for coming. We have 1 week left while the Sioux Line Museum is open through Labor Day. Be open Tuesday through Saturday of this week from 10 in the morning till 4 o'clock. And we have a kind of an extended exhibit of some of the things that you've seen here tonight and some other things on the Milford mine. So if you want a chance to stop by, Sioux Line Depot is actually located in the original Sioux Line Depot that was built by the railroad in 1910 and is now a museum. And you're welcome to stop by there. The Milford Mine Park, like I mentioned, is open year-round. It was worth a trip up there to see that too. So thank you for coming and for your time and for being here this evening.